What's up? In this tutorial, we are going to cover how to use SpeedTree to make a tree and then how to export that tree into Unreal Engine. We're going to cover the basics of using SpeedTree, the software, a little bit about the interface, a little bit about how to start creating plants, get up and running really quickly if you haven't used SpeedTree before, and then how to export that efficiently to Unreal Engine, what are the export settings you need to know, and then how to get that plant ready to use in Unreal Engine. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get into it. So when you first open SpeedTree, you're going to get this pop-up here, and this is how we open files that we have been working on, or open sample project that they also have in that comes with SpeedTree, or create a new tree. In our case, we're going to go ahead and create a new tree. So we're going to hit this button here and choose a new tree. It gives us some different presets with which to start that process. We can either start with an existing setup for a plant, and they have a few different really helpful setups here for grass or palm or plant. And there's also two different categories here. We have visual effects, which is really just means that the tree has higher poly related to it. And now in this age of using nanite in Unreal Engine, these differentiations between the games and VFX trees become a little bit less clear. At this point, you can probably use either of them when you're starting your trees, but we're going to go ahead and use a blank project because I want to build this tree up from the ground up. Okay, so looking at the interface here, we have a few different quadrants. Actually, we have 4 main quadrants that you need to pay attention to. The obvious one in the middle is the 3D viewport, and this is how we look at the tree that we're building or the plant that we're building. And the way we navigate this interface is left clicking and dragging, and that rotates around the tree. We can also use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. Right click brings up a contextual menu. If we hold down Alt and left click, we will also sort of pan. So those are the main key commands you need to know to navigate the 3D interface. If you'd like to change the controls of the 3D interface to be closer to the 3D package that you're familiar with, you can come up here to the preferences here and go to the tree window. And under the control scheme, you can choose maybe Autodesk Maya as a preset or 3ds Max or adjust these navigation options. Okay, so that's the 3D viewport. At the top of the 3D viewport, we have a few shortcuts to different types of settings. We're going to come back to these later. On the left side here, we have 2 windows that are important. The top one here is our tree graph. The way the SpeedTree works is that it just kind of stack nodes or different steps, we'll say, on top of each other, from the trunk to the branches to the leaves. It's very logical in that way. And so we can see a representation of that up here in the top left corner. Underneath that, we have our properties window, which is basically where we do all of our adjustments to our tree. Most of our adjustments where we're changing values of how many branches are generated and how thick the tree is, and those kind of things all will be done here in the properties panel. So we'll come back to that in a lot more detail in a minute. But on the right side here, we have, I'm going to call it the look development window. It basically takes materials and meshes importing and displacement importing and kind of puts it all together in this window. We can here make materials to apply to our trees. We can make import meshes to use. We can create sets of materials or import displacement maps. They're all located here on the right side. And so when we make a actual bark or leaf material or import leaf meshes or actually make leaf meshes here on the right side, that will let us do that. All right, so let's go ahead and make our first trunk for our tree. We can do that in a lot of different ways. The way SpeedTree works is that there's a lot of different buttons that do the same thing. So to make a trunk, we can always right click, add geometry, a trunk, or we could come up over here to the generation window and hit add. I'm going to use the generation window exclusively in this tutorial just to keep things from being too complicated. So I'm going to come up here to the add button and drop it down and choose trunk, which you can see here adds a trunk node here onto our tree node, and it makes a trunk in our viewport. Now, when I hit the button, there's a few kind of things we can make with the add button, and basically the way it works is whatever we have selected here in our generation window will be what that thing is added onto. So if we added branches, we would select our trunk and then add branches on. But also underneath that, we also have preset for each of those categories. So within trunks here, we have old or split or tall or hand-drawn trunks. These are all different approaches to not just creating a basic trunk, but creating one with a little more character. These are kind of presets that can give you a little head start. Branches, leaves, different leaf presets. And you can see down here, we're not going to cover it in this tutorial, but you can also import photogrammetry and meshes and things. All right, so we've created our basic trunk. How do we adjust how this trunk looks? So we're going to click on the trunk in our generation window, or you can actually click in the 3D viewport as well. And we're going to come over to our properties panel here. Now our properties panel and the editing mode in general has three main, we'll call them modes. We have our generator mode, which is how we define the general procedural settings for the tree. We have our node mode, which is how we define the settings for individual nodes. So for example, if I have 5 branches, I control all 5 branches through the generator window. These are the branch settings. And then if I go to the node mode, I can click on an individual branch and do things to that individual branch. And then we have freehand, which is not something we're going to cover in this tutorial, but this would allow you to actually paint or draw or do more artistic adjustments to your tree. You don't have to purely rely on procedural tools. You can literally just paint the shape that you want your branch to be as well. All of those tools are here in SpeedTree, and this is where they live inside these different modes. So we're going to stick to the generator mode for now, because a lot of the stuff in this tutorial is going to be more just how to set up basic tree. And so as you go deeper with more complicated plants and how to achieve specific art directed looks, that's when you would start to go into the node and the freehand mode. Okay, so we'll stick to the generator mode. Now the generator mode has a bunch of different categories, and this is very confusing at first because SpeedTree has so many settings, hundreds of settings. And you can see if you scroll down, there's so many settings. So it can be a little daunting to be like, how do I adjust the look? I don't even know where to go in this sea of settings. So the way to think about this attribute window is it's organized in the way the tree itself is built internally, which is that it has a spine, which is basically a line that controls kind of the shape of the tree, whether it bends or curls or its direction. And then we have the skin, which is the bark, or in this case, the actual mesh that's wrapped around that spine. So if you think about it in that way, most of the settings that are the look or the shape of the tree, in this case the main trunk, are located here under the spine or the skin. So for example, we wanted to make the trunk a little more wiggly, a little more, uneven in its directions. Come over to the spine category. So if we come down here to the late noise, we can go ahead and add a little bit of noise, and that would make the tree a little more wiggly. We could also come up here to the length area and increase the length of the tree. That would give basically the length of the spine. It will change it. We could also come to the orientation and rotate it around or angle it in a particular direction. So that's the spine. Now, when we look at the skin here, this is going to define the outer bark area, or the outer mesh. It's not always bark, so we'll say outer mesh area. So I'll come to the skin section, and here we could define like the radius of the tree. So remember, this is the mesh that's wrapped around the spine. So we can define the radius. We can make it, let's make it a little bit thinner here. Okay, so that is the general approach to defining the shape of a tree. So there's still a lot of settings in each of these categories, but at least now you have sort of a framework for knowing where to look for the thing that you want to change. Some other things I'll just briefly mention is that the segment section is where we control the complexity of the mesh. So if I zoom in here and we come up to the render drop down and we change it to script, which is going to show the actual geometry to us, and we come to the segment section, we could increase length segments, which are these polygons going up and down, or the radial segments, which are the polygons going around. That's how to add additional resolution to your mesh. So I'm going to come back to the render view and switch it to standard again. We have a basic trunk here. Let's go ahead and add some branches. So again, remember, we come up to the generation window here and we hit the add button, and we can choose just a branch here, or we can try using a preset. So we'll come down to the branches and choose bifurcating. This will go ahead and make a bunch of branches for us. Then let's come back over here to the properties panel and come to a generation category. We have our spine and our skin. Generation is kind of the procedural spawning of these elements. So if I wanted more branches in this case, I would come over to the generation category here. Depending on the mode that we're using, it will give us different settings for how to define how many branches there are, for example. In this case, we're using spacing. So if I put less spacing in between branches spawning, they'll spawn additional branches here or more. If we used, for example, absolute, we could actually define an actual number for the branches. I'm going to press Ctrl-Z to go back. Okay, so we'll just define some branches like this maybe. Something common that I run into is that when we have a bunch of branches and a trunk is that we'll still have the kind of top of the trunk here open, and there's a few different ways to fix that. One is to actually make it kind of taper down to a single point, or we can come down here to the extend parent and choose any, and that will go ahead and add an additional branch onto the parent, basically extending it into a branch. So that helps us there. Let's go ahead and add an additional step of branches. We can stack any number of branches or different things on top of each other to achieve the look of the tree that we want. So we could come up here and add some additional branches. I'll go ahead and add some more. That looks pretty good. Then at the end here, we could go ahead and hit the add button again with our second branches selected. And we could go ahead and add some final step of branches. So you can see this is looking pretty good here, but we are having all of our branches mostly located on one side of the tree. And so if you can imagine where we would need to go to fix this problem, is it a spine issue? Is it a mesh, outer mesh skin issue? Or is it a generation issue? It's a generation issue. So if we come back to our bifurcating branches here by clicking on the node up here, or actually clicking on them in the viewport here, we can come over to our generation area. And since we're using bifurcating, we'll look at the bifurcating section here and we'll choose the align option. And we can try pulling this align over, which will go ahead and kind of spread that branch generation out a little bit over the tree. Again, this just takes a little bit of practice to know which setting to go to, but just try to think of it in that framework. Like I keep mentioning, what's the problem, or what do I want to change and adjust? Okay, is it a spine issue, a generation issue, or a skin issue, or a segment issue, like we need more geometry? Okay, so we'll come to our last bifurcating branches here, and I'm actually going to add one additional level of branches just to keep spreading it out a little bit. Hey, just wanted to jump in here and let you know that I have a free gift for you. If you are wanting to build really high quality Unreal Engine environments, especially natural environments, I'm giving away my landscape material for free. This is a fully featured landscape auto material and landscape layer material. It's the one I use now on all my projects. I'm really proud of this material. It's a very fully featured asset that can expand and contract in a very modular way to the complexity of your project. I've included all kinds of features like nanite displacement, auto beach layers, auto snow layers. All of the layers are blended using real height information to create a really realistic look. There's also runtime grass, either using the traditional grass system or PCG. It also completely takes care of the tiling texture problem with a bunch of different features that break up your textures. I've also built in a really streamlined Footstep Sound system using data assets that you can very easily drag and drop your sounds for your footsteps into, and reads off the physical material of the surface that you are on. As a bonus, I know sometimes when we download assets off the marketplace, it can be very confusing to integrate them into our projects because everybody thinks about things differently, has different organization styles. So I want to make sure that it's as streamlined a process for you to pick up this material and start using as possible. So I've included a free mini course that comes with the material and teaches you about every single feature and how to use it, how to implement it in your own project. If you're interested, just head to the link below to the page and enter your email, and a link to the download page will be sent to you by email. And if you ever have any feature requests or questions, just let me know. Enjoy. And now it's time to add some leaves. So we'll come and go ahead to the add button again, and we'll come down to the leaves preset, and I'll just choose scattered. We can come now to our generation area for our leaves and adjust the number of leaves here that we have spawning. And there we go. That's our first plant. Now this is a good segue into how to use the materials option for our trees. So the way we make a new material is come over to our material manager little drop down here, which is the plus and minus button here. We can either make a new material straight from textures using the plus button. I'm going to use this because it's a little more clear what's happening. So I'm going to use the plus and minus button here, and here we have a little window where we can add new materials. So I'm going to add a new one, and I'm going to call it bark, and we'll also add a new one and we'll call it leaves. I'll hit OK. And now we can see in our little drop down here at the top, we have two different materials we can look at in our material editing window. And that material editing window has a bunch of different settings here. For example, we have different texture inputs. We can also add variations through this window. So I'm going to switch to the bark first, and we'll go ahead and import the textures for bark. And the way you import a texture is literally just clicking on that input there. Now, SpeedTree comes with a bunch of different preset textures we can use to make materials, and you can find that in the SpeedTree folder here in your C drive or wherever you saved it or wherever you installed SpeedTree to, and then the SpeedTree modeler version that you have, and then the samples folder. This will have a bunch of different textures we can use to make different kinds of materials, but you can always download your own textures and use them as well from Fab or any other location. Okay, so we'll go ahead and I'll just choose the first one here, which is bark 1. It has a bunch of different textures related to bark 1 to go ahead and make our bark material. I'll hit OK. Now, when we have a bunch of textures that are related to each other, usually by name, it'll pick up on that and it'll say, do you want me to import those textures also? So usually we want to say yes. And so that imported all of our textures. However, if it didn't for any reason, we can always just come over here and click on the normal map and come over here to the bark 1 normal, click on that and hit OK, and then we've imported our textures. So now we need to go ahead and assign this to our tree. We'll go ahead and click the little hand button and just drag it on to our tree. And if we have branches that are branching off of a trunk, usually they will go ahead and inherit that material unless we assign a different material to it. Now, the way that this texture is laid out on the surface of each of the branches and the trunk, you can find the settings for that here under the UV section in your attributes panel. For example, if I wanted to change the number of times the texture is tiled in the up and down direction, I could come over here to the V. U would be repeated to the left and right, and V would be repeated up and down. And so I could come over here and increase the scale of the V tiling, and that would let me tile my texture up and down. So let's go ahead and add our leaves as well. I'll come over and switch over to the leaves and drag it on to the leaves here. We forgot to add textures, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll come to the color and we'll click on it, and I'll come back to my samples folder here, again under the SpeedTree, wherever you've installed it to, then the SpeedTree version, and then the samples folder. And we'll scroll down here until we come to some leaves. These leaves look good, so I'll do a chestnut front one, and we'll go ahead and hit OK. And yes, import all of them. And there you go. Now we've imported leaves. So I want to really quickly lower the size of the leaves here a little bit. So I'll come over to the skin area and we'll come to the leaves and lower the size a little bit. Then I'll come to the generation and we'll increase the number a little bit. Another thing we want to do is for leaves, they are double-sided. So you can see when we turn to certain angles, they disappear. So in the material here, we just need to come over and choose two-sided, and that will also help our tree feel a little bit more full. Now for the leaves, we can come over here to the orientation. You can see that right now they're kind of like, they have a kind of a flat look to them. So we want to come over here to the leaf and the orientation, play with some of these alignment options to get them looking a little more natural. And now we come to an important concept in SpeedTree, which is randomization between different leaves. So for example, I want all of these leaves right now are the same size, and I have, you noticed, one size control for the leaves. But what if I want to add a size variation? So each leaf is a slightly different size. We can do that by coming over here to the skin area again, where we change the size. And here we've been using the either the dragging here or the number, but you can notice that there right next to it is a graph here. We click on and use a graph, or we can use a plus or minus option here. And what this basically does is allows us to add variance to this existing size we've already set. So if we click on that plus or minus here and we add variance, now we can add the randomization between leaves. So if I up this to say 0.8, and then we can lower our size down a little bit. Now we're getting a nice scale variation between the different leaves. All right, so now let's go ahead and add wind to our tree. First, we want to make sure we're using the right wind calculation type, because there are a few different options. There's different types of game wind, different types of wind for visual effects if you're using this for that purpose. So we want to come over to our generation window and click somewhere in the empty gray space. So we're unselecting any parts of the tree, and we'll have a bunch of these preset buttons that will take us to some setting options. So if we click on wind, here we want to choose our wind mode. There's a bunch of different approaches: visual effects, game, legacy, lumberyard, and we're going to choose games. I know it says Unreal Engine here next to Legacy Unity, but we're going to choose games. Then we're going to go ahead and choose Wind Wizard here as an option, because this basically needs to go through the tree, look at what type of trunk or leaf or branch each part of it is, and adjust the settings for the wind and how the wind affects that part of the tree accordingly. So we're going to go and choose from some presets, and I'm going to go and choose, let's say, a ornamental cultivated tree, because it seems about close to the size of the tree that we've made. Generation, wind weights and levels, set them for me. That's what it's doing. Conditions, breezy. This is always something we could change later. And the leaf types. Now this is important if you're making like palm trees. They'll have a slightly different way of calculating wind. For us, we want to choose something like small rustly leaves, because that's what I have on my tree. And under the leaf type, we could choose, whether it's fruits or flowers or different things. Okay, so let's hit OK. And now you can see it's gone ahead and added wind to our tree. And we can see our trunk is a lot more stable. And then we have branches, which are kind of bending a little bit more, and then our leaves themselves are blowing the most. And we can control all of our wind settings here on the right of our 3D viewport. You can see we can change the angle of the blowing kind of little turbine here, and we can also increase the gust strength by hitting the green arrow and raising it, or the wind strength, which will increase, whether it's in a storm. If we increase this, it'll look more like it's in a really intense storm. And you can see it gradually will adjust back up there. Okay, looking good. All right, so let's go ahead and export our tree into Unreal Engine. All we have to do is go up to the File dropdown and choose Export Mesh. And here we want to choose the game export. I also cover in a different video how to export using Pivot Painter wind, which is a higher quality wind and works a little bit better with Nanite. So in that case, we'd use slightly different settings here. I will link that tutorial at the end of this video and in the description. But for us, we're going to go ahead and choose games. And the file type we want to choose is ST9. .st here is going to be the older type that we used when we chose the wind type. This is what we're talking about. So the wind type that is legacy Unreal Engine uses ST, and we're using the slightly newer version, which is .st9, and because we chose the games option in the wind type. We're going to go ahead and choose .st9 here, and the settings we want to set up here are, if you set up LOD settings, you can set them up here. I'm just going to run through these quickly. We're going to turn off swap Y and Z, and we're going to choose the packing option as Unreal Engine, and that's all we need to do. I'll go ahead and hit export, and I'll replace the file I exported before. Going to go ahead and export the mesh and our textures. Then we're going to come to Unreal Engine, and we're going to hit the add button just as we would in any other type of import. We're going to choose import into current folder, and we'll go ahead and choose that tree we just exported, just the .st9 file. The other textures will come along with it. So if we go ahead and hit open, we'll go ahead and run through the importer, and it will go ahead and make the material for us with the textures assigned, which is really nice. We can go ahead and drag our tree into our world. And there you go. Now it is working with its materials, and the wind is already set up. All right, there you have it. If you found this video helpful, let me know with a thumbs up or a comment if you have any questions. If you're interested in exporting SpeedTree with a little bit higher quality wind, I also have another video on how to do that using Pivot Painter wind. You can find that video up here somewhere. All right, with that, I will see you in the next one.